This video brought to you with the support of Grizzly Bears. Special thanks to the Coca-Cola Bear, the Berenstein Bears, Little Bear, and my brother bear, Benjamin. Hi, I'd like to take a second to talk to you about Secretary DeVos and the factors considered with her recent confirmation. And let's try this new thing together. Instead of jumping in solely to find things that support our emotions, let's glance over the facts and then use those to derive a conclusion. Just as a heads up, anytime you see a flashing number like this, it correlates to a source that is in the description of this video. I'd like to begin with the numbers, because every time you see your name in the news, there's someone talking about finances. This chart is showing campaign contributions to the listed senators by the DeVos family since 1980. And as you can see, the numbers, with about 3 exceptions, are all pretty substantially large contributions. I mean, Senator Rubio's been given almost $100,000. And this can easily be seen, or construed or misconstrued, as the corrupting power of money in politics buying a high position. However, I think that there's a larger context around these numbers that isn't as widely circulated. On the one side, Snopes does confirm that millions of GOP campaign dollars have been raised by the DeVos family. The ballpark estimate is around $120 million to Republican candidates, to Republican Party committees, to PACs and super PACs. And Betsy herself is responsible for around 7% of these contributions. And on the other side, this $20 million is spread out over numerous candidates and around a quarter century, which is several campaign cycles. Also, it's not definitive proof that DeVos is buying her position because of Lisa Murkowski, the Alaska senator who received money from the DeVos family and also voted no at a confirmation vote. However, DeVos did not need to buy everybody, because that's blatantly corruption. They needed enough, and they got it, and now it goes both ways. Murkowski voting no even helps because it's an example of independently voting regardless of financial contributions. It's also literally the job description of Steve Scalise and John Cornyn to whip Republicans in the House and Senate respectively to vote along party lines. Finally, these are drops in the bucket for many of these candidates, especially true for high-profile senators such as Rubio. $100,000 is objectively a small percent when it takes millions of dollars to run a campaign. DeVos money was never the deciding factor between a victory and a defeat. And while we're on the topic of money, let's discuss Senator Elizabeth Warren, who asked DeVos questions about the federal banking system.
The Department of Education is in charge of making sure that the $150 billion that we invest in students each year gets into the right hands.
The Secretary of Education is responsible for 2 huge ticket items. Number 1 is a $1 trillion student loan banking system, which affects 40 million Americans, myself included. There's no way that you don't know someone that's affected by federal student loans. And number 2 is the proper allocation of $30 billion in Pell Grant funds annually, every year. DeVos has never run a financial institution of this size and has never had direct experience being a participant of federal student loans. And I want to clarify something right here. I understand we cannot shame Secretary DeVos for being wealthy or for being well off. She's never had to endure educational loans, and she's been able to provide the same privilege for her children. And this isn't bad. I mean, we should all be so lucky. Let's continue to say this. It is a factor. She would have a better argument with more humane aspects if she had struggled, if she had demonstrated hard work for this lack of loan experience. It certainly doesn't help, but this doesn't make her unqualified. What makes her unqualified is that she's incompetent. She doesn't need to understand perfectly a job that she's never worked. She naturally lacks mastery, and I can understand that. But her answers to questions differentiating proficiency by benchmark or growth validation is proof in and of itself. They both mean literally what the term says. Do you measure student aptitude by asking if 3rd grade students can all read at a 3rd grade level? Or do you ask the question, has every student, regardless of where they began, improved their reading skills significantly during the 3rd grade? Beyond this example, she apparently hasn't the foggiest how to administer it, how to regulate it, and how to foster the growth of education as a necessary foundation as an industry in American society. Senator Warren also asked if DeVos would commit to making federal funding contingent upon the knowledge that the institution is properly preparing students for gainful employment and not cheating them.
And so you will enforce the gainful employment rule to make sure that these career colleges are not cheating students?
We will certainly review that rule.
You'll review it? You will not commit to enforce it?
And see that it is actually achieving what the intentions are.
I don't understand about reviewing it. We talked about this in my office. There are already rules in place to stop waste, fraud, and abuse. And I don't understand how you can not be sure about enforcing them.
And DeVos ducks this question entirely. She says that she will review enforcement, not that she can enforce it. And on the one hand, it might be wise to not commit to anything during this hearing because the opposing party could use it for a smear campaign and hold her accountable to something that's beyond what she meant if she answered. But also, this seems like a fairly nonpartisan question. It's just asking if she'll do her job and regulate government involvement and support of education. And I struggle to see the leverage in answering either way. Finally, on the topic of senatorial questioning, I'd like to quote Tim Kaine's question when he asks the following.
So I take it that you won't have any way of knowing when asked by the president to take official action in your capacity as secretary, how those actions might affect his personal financial situation.
Or, to reword it, your actions will be independent of profit or loss on behalf of the president because you lack knowledge of how it will affect him, which she had just said was true. See the source below. And DeVos says, I kid you not, this is verbatim.
I'm not sure I could comment on that.
I'm not sure I could comment on that. Like, holy moly, this is very sketchy. I mean, it's definitely a loaded question by Senator Kaine, but the fact that a question about not being corrupted by the president's financial profits is loaded, combined with her inability to answer it, is pretty messed up. That shouldn't be a loaded question, and she shouldn't have to answer that in a way that demonizes her, and the fact that that's an option says something. Like, I would be more okay with an honest answer that the president may communicate a preference for reasons of his finances and not reasons of what's best for America's children, and that this pressure from the president of the United States might influence me. It's still an awful answer, but it's at least understandable to presume that pressure from the president would push even the hardiest of people over. This inability to answer is cowardly, and it's augmented in a moment when Senator Kaine reminds us that President Trump owns a university. Trump University is a for-profit place I refuse to call an educational institution that has been pestered with lawsuits for years. Trump settled recently out of court after saying that he never would because it was affecting his successful presidential bid at the time. He settled out of court, and Trump University doesn't have to acknowledge fault or liability. Also, as an aside here, let me touch on Detroit. I don't find Detroit to be compelling evidence for or against the DeVos method of schooling. This method is called capitalistic competition. The Detroit News reports that Stanford University's Center for Research on Education Outcomes has studied charter performance in urban areas and found Detroit to be a model for other communities, despite having one of the highest poverty urban charter populations. And I can't say that Stanford is incorrect, because they are Stanford, and I am not. I will argue context, however. Charter performance as a metric is only useful when you understand the context that charter schools are not a system that everybody has access to. In her defense, I think the argument that DeVos would make is that she wants to make charter schools more affordable, and that she wants to make school choice independent of the household socioeconomic status. Although, I can't say for certain. I don't know her platform, and honestly, it seems like she doesn't know her platform in any substantial way. And this would stem several potent concerns that I and many American students and parents have. But, as it currently stands, the connections between money and education are too strong for it to account for all students, especially ones that lack both an abundance of wealth and the peripherals of wealth, like quality learning materials, tutoring, private education, and care outside of school while the parent or parents are at work. Which is to say, duh, charter schools are effective, because they run off money and correlate to the effects of money in childhood upbringing. In the end, I believe this. I believe that Mrs. DeVos is not undeniably guilty of having bought her nomination and confirmation. Maybe it's because she deserved it. Maybe it's because her coalition was crafty enough to maintain just enough plausible deniability to elude clear judgment. I do believe that Betsy lacks fundamental knowledge of the role, and while we can't blame her for a lack of experience, because no one deserves criticism and derision for success and a life of affluence, I'm much more concerned with people do with good fortune. She doesn't need experience, but she also, coincidentally, has no knowledge. And finally, I believe in quality public education to the end of high school as just a fundamental public civil right. And Betsy is very clear that it shouldn't be, because we should run it like a business on principles of capitalistic competition. Valerie Strauss of the Washington Post talks about this sentiment best when saying that the DeVos confirmation defies the notion that America's public education system is a civic institution, the country's most important, in fact, that can't be run like a business without ensuring that some children will be winners and others will be losers, just like in business. Supporters of public education acknowledge the system has failed many students, but largely believe the solution is to improve the public schools to address what students really need to succeed. And here's what students really need to succeed. They need the American people to hold Secretary DeVos accountable to a standard of quality. Blocking her entrance to a DC school in protest is only of detriment to our children. The battle of preventing an unqualified woman from this office is over, and the American public lost. Like it or loathe it, this is now her job. It's now her job to be in DC schools. It's now her job to be in all schools, including and especially schools serving students with physical, mental, and learning disabilities. So get out of the way and let her do her job. Push and be involved and be picky and hold her accountable to this job to ensure she doesn't twist it into some business that profits off of parents and children. If we as the American people fail in this endeavor, the collateral is not just a tarnish in history, it is a whole generation of American children that grow up in poor educational standards. They will not be stupid because they can never be stupid. But they can be woefully misinformed and uneducated because we don't prevent DeVos from leveraging the minds of future leaders and the soon-to-be foundation of our workforce for profit and the benefit of those children that are rich enough to be educated properly. You have a burden. The American people on January 20th were handed a burden that has never been heavier, and I have never been more sure that we are strong enough to carry it. Thank you.